Hey team, Stuart Taylor here from Influential PMO. I'm here to support the project community, and today I have a slightly different kind of video. I'm going to be presenting a report that's come out in the last week to do with the lessons learned from major programs as compiled by the National Audit Office in the UK. The intention today is to have a look at the learnings from these major programs, and even though you may not yourself be working on a major program, you might be working on much smaller projects, there are still lessons to be learned that are transferable to projects of any size. It's worth being aware that the National Audit Office is the UK's independent public spending watchdog. So their findings, their inputs into this kind of thing is actually quite useful and quite interesting. The scope of the report is to look at the government's major projects portfolio, which includes the government's largest, most innovative and most risky programs, which currently includes 125 major programs at a combined whole life cost of £448 billion. So a lot of these projects are transformative, they're using new technologies, and they do involve a huge investment from the public purse. These include High Speed 2, which is launching a high-speed railway across the country using new technologies. Carrier Strike, which involves building new aircraft carriers, a radar system and supply and support ships. A program to carry out significant work to restore the Palace of Westminster, and the Emergency Services Mobile Communications Program, which is replacing the mobile communications service used by the 3 emergency services. The first of the findings was around scope, and they found that the scope of the program should be aligned to the strategic objectives of the organisation. The main learning points were that bodies should establish a clear alignment between a program's objectives and its scope. Where there are multiple objectives, these should be coherent, and any tensions should be clearly recognised. Establishing a clear alignment between objective and scope should provide bodies with a firm foundation to assess and prioritise any potential changes to scope or objectives. Under the category of cost and schedules, the first insight was to understand the limits of cost and schedule estimations. Amongst the key learning points here was that senior decision makers should ensure they understand the underlying basis of estimations and the areas of risk and uncertainty. An estimate produced from early high-level information is unlikely to be suitable for setting a program budget and schedule, and should only be used in an indicative fashion to guide long-term planning until a detailed design supported by industry pricing is available. And lastly, ranges are now being used to better reflect the boundaries of possible cost and schedule outcomes. Decision makers must work to understand what these ranges represent and how much confidence they can put in them. Another insight was to try to be realistic about the schedule. Senior decision makers should be alert to behaviours that suggest the schedule is becoming increasingly challenging. Organisations should consider early in a program's life cycle what needs to be in place to meet their schedule targets, and periodically assess the likelihood of these requirements being in place. The last insight on cost and schedules was to have detailed plans that can help you to achieve anticipated savings. Once bodies have identified potential sources of savings, they should develop detailed plans which identify the steps needed to achieve them. The next category of the report relates to interdependencies, and it starts off by recommending that interdependencies are identified and managed. Bodies should assure themselves that a program's critical path identifies all of the contributing activities needed to bring the program to completion, including where issues and delays with one element might threaten the delivery of the whole program. Bodies should clearly define who is responsible for integration and ensure that they have the appropriate authority and levers to coordinate other elements of the program. Where government intends a program to have wider benefits, it should put in place a plan setting out how these wider benefits will be achieved and who is responsible for doing this, particularly where these might depend on other departments not delivering the core program. The next insight on interdependencies was to consider operational planning from the beginning. Bodies should define how a program is intended to be used in practice from the outset and continually develop their understanding of how it will be used in operation as the program develops. Where possible, entry into use should be carried out in stages to test and refine delivery and reduce the implementation risks of a larger improvement. However, bodies should develop arrangements for each stage in advance and in detail. The next category of the report is governance and oversight. The first insight is to ensure that program management changes as the program develops. Bodies should consider different types of activity required by the program and the different risks that may emerge at different stages of the program. This understanding will help guide planning for how program management arrangements may need to change as it progresses. Regardless of what governing agreements are in place, government fundamentally remains accountable for the program. As a result, departments should remain alive to when their current governance approach may not be working, and be prepared to amend arrangements to enable them to carry out their responsibilities. The final insight in the report relates to the importance for transparency and honesty within major programs. Bodies must ensure that information within their organisation is accurate, consistent, and timely. Decision makers should consider whether the indicators they are presented are the right ones and how they would alert them to issues emerging. Organisations should examine their and their contractors' culture and behaviours to ensure that an effective line of sight from the working level up to decision makers as well as the wider public. They should ensure that commercial arrangements incentivise transparency and honesty within the supply chain. To be honest with you, I tend to read these reports and I tend to be surprised by how obvious some of the insights are. Maybe the takeaway from this is if you're looking at your own project and change culture and you're seeing these gaps, you don't need to feel inadequate about the fact that they exist. They clearly exist in the major programs. That's how they ended up in this report. So rather than beating yourself up about these things, take the learnings from this and be proactive and start to apply them in your own organisation. Maybe you can be the change that makes things better at your place. Well, I hope this has been useful and informative to you. If so, I hope you will like the video, and if you don't want to miss any future content like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I'm Stuart Taylor, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next time.